Welcome home to Homespun, a weekly internet gathering of family, friends, and businesses from Platte County. Our purpose is to connect our community and showcase the colorful threads that run through our tapestry. Grab a warm cup of hometown goodness, sit back, put your feet up, and visit with us a while. I'm your host, Mark DeLapp, and I bring to you portions of interviews from some of our own. Welcome home, Platte County, to Homespun. All right, we're here with John Voigt, and up in Sunrise. John actually owns Sunrise. And John, you look you look pretty good for having done so many movies in your lifetime.
Yeah, it's just amazing how it's the makeup. Makeup, come in.
Yeah, unfortunately on Homespun we don't have the budget for makeup. But so, John, you are the owner of the town of Sunrise. Tell me how that all began.
Oh my heavens, how it all began. Okay, so it all began by the fact that I had known the prior owner. At the time, it was in the 1990s, and I was working on historic property in downtown Cheyenne. And I had several buildings down there, and having good luck working some old projects in downtown Cheyenne. I loved it because it gave me a chance to work in old buildings, update them a little bit, get them productive again. And there were quite a few actually vacant buildings, and I met a guy who had inherited some buildings there, and he was also the same guy that inherited Sunrise, Wyoming at the same time. His father had those properties. And so at the time I worked with him on trying to find a market for his properties in Cheyenne. That's when he informed me that he had also inherited Sunrise. And having grown up in this area 60 miles south of here and not knowing about Sunrise, that intrigued me, so I came up and visited the place in the late 1990s for the first time in my life.
Where were you born, John?
I was born in Wheatland, but I was raised on the ranch at Chugwater. So we've been ranching at Chug for over 100 years.
Okay.
And it still amazes me to this day why we didn't really talk much about Sunrise. In fact, I don't remember ever it coming up in a school class or a history class or a social studies class. We just didn't talk about it. I don't know why. And here was this very large, consequential mine, one of the largest iron mines west of the Mississippi, so close by, and we didn't know about it.
I think growing up as kids, I think we grew up in the same era, so we're kind of tunnel visioned as to what was going on in our own communities and things like this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after I graduated that all of a sudden I started to investigate things in my own town, like the lime kilns that the
Sure.
Indians built and things like this. I think you get more accustomed to it after you do graduate. So after high school, John, where did you go from there?
Well, after high school, I went to the University of Wyoming, a music major. And then I went overseas and worked. I was fortunate to work in the Mideast, farming and irrigating over there. Came back.
A music major, and you're over farming in the Middle East.
I like to apply my trade.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I was farming, and then I came back, and then I went to college, University of Wyoming, got a degree in finance there. Kept with the music, got married, went back to the Mideast again, worked in Saudi, farming, and then came back to Wyoming and lived in Laramie for about 25 years.
What was the affection for music?
My family, it was music in our family. We always had music in the family. My sisters are musicians. My mother she sang in a big band. My father was a pretty good musician. And so there was always music in the house, and we were always in a choir or doing something musically. So this is just a background. You just grow up around it and you do it. Yeah,
same here. My mom used to drag us to the nursing homes.
Every weekend, we did nursing home.
We had to do we brought our auto harps, and auto harps, and we'd sing for the elderly.
Uh-huh.
And I still am in that habit of doing that. People say, "Why do you do that?" I said, "Because once you sow it, I'm not going to die alone."
Exactly.
Exactly. And
we did it through our youth choirs, our church choirs.
Sure.
Yeah, so I was in a lot of choirs.
Did you play any instruments growing up?
Oh yeah, lots of instruments.
Okay.
My first instrument was probably the ukulele, and then saxophone was my primary instrument for band, junior high and high school band. And then guitar. I started getting into guitar in high school. So that's my love is guitar.
See, I played tuba for 16 years, so I played it in the Milwaukee Youth Symphony and in the University of Wisconsin Jazz Band.
Yeah.
So yeah, I extended it
With tuba. Jazz
with
band
tuba. Yeah, I took a Duke
good
Ellington
stuff.
piece one time and transposed it down from bass trombone to tuba. Squealed. I think Doc Severinsen, who was the judge, stood up and said, "Tuba, I've never heard anything like that."
Oh
And I
my
said, "Well,
gosh.
I've never done anything
That's
like this." So
fantastic.
yeah, it was kind of fun. But then I broke my neck and I put pressure on my embouchure and things, so I took up piano. So
That'll do it.
yeah, now just carrying the piano was kind of rough.
What'd you do? Don't get around much anymore?
Yeah.
Is that what you do?
Well, the thing
Duke
is they said I was going to be a quadriplegic the rest of my life.
Oh man, you are lucky.
I'm a walking miracle.
Yeah.
I look at the x-ray and they still can't understand how come I'm walking. Wow. But I rehabilitated myself. By the time I was a senior, I played college basketball and then went and got drafted to play in Australia. But always had that love for music.
That's
Same thing you did
fantastic.
too. So, music
I
is
love
something
basketball,
cool
too.
is that you carry it with you your whole life. And you are still a musician to this day, right?
Yeah, I loosely use that term loosely. I love music. I play. Sometimes I get paid.
Yes. And sometimes it's just fun.
Yeah, and I just love doing it. That's how I
Yeah.
get. That's how I relax. And
Well,
that's my creative outlet.
You also are a Harry Chapin fan.
Yeah,
And I can remember a song that he wrote called Mr. Tanner,
yeah.
which told about the dry cleaner that sang opera. And remember the line in that movie that song that said, it wasn't his livelihood, it was his life.
His life. Yes, that's a great song.
I know.
It's on Cherry Chapin's. I have that on one of his albums.
Yeah, I do too.
I like Taxi. I like to do
Yep,
Taxi.
yep, I do too.
Great storytelling.
Oh, I love that kind of stuff. So back to Sunrise. So you got into the place where you had an opportunity to purchase this.
Yes. Yeah, that's a strange story. It would take hours to tell it, but I eventually got myself in a situation where I had an opportunity to buy the place because the owner at the time was considering a sale to a Chinese company. It was in a time around 2010, 2011 when the world price of iron ore had skyrocketed, and Chinese companies were going all over the world looking for iron resources, and they'd found this place and had made plans to buy it. I kind of got in their way because the owner didn't want to sell it to him, so I bought it.
So you pretty much just put a roadblock up for the Chinese and got yourself an entire town.
Once again, it has worked out probably to the betterment of the archaeological site, because I really doubt they would have had an interest in the archaeology that I do. Who knows? They may not have had an interest in this whole historic town.
Sure.
In its history. Don't know what would have happened.
You did not buy it originally for an archaeological site, though, did you?
I didn't know there was any archaeology here. I didn't know
Okay.
the site was here when I bought it.
But you bought a town that has very few buildings on it.
Mm-hmm.
It used to have a hospital. It has the oldest YMCA building in Wyoming. Tell me a little bit about the history of this building.
Well, we're in the current YMCA. It was built in 1917. The short story about why it was built by John D. Rockefeller Jr., whose family and he personally had pretty much, he was pretty much in control of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company at the time. The Rockefeller contingent of people kind of had control of the steel company at the time. There was a tremendous amount of labor unrest at the time. And
What year?
Well,
Back in the
1917 is when this was built. There was a tremendous amount of unrest beginning in early 1900s up through the early 1900s, teens. Many of this unrest was at mine workers. CF and I had a lot of trouble in Colorado. A lot of strikes, violence. One well-known violent incident occurred called the Ludlow Massacre at one of their mines in southern Colorado. And so I don't know, through economics or a change of heart, John Rockefeller said we need to change this relationship between management and labor. And so they started providing more amenities for the workers, including things like YMCAs, hospitals, churches, better working conditions, shorter working hours, better pay. Social programs like this YMCA had YMCA directors that would provide a whole gamut of social programs, speaker series, library. They had what we would call a naturalization program for the immigrants. They had, what did they call them, Americanization program or something like that, where they could come in and the immigrants could learn how to be American and then and get their naturalization papers and do that right here on site.
Right.
So it was a cultural center. My aunt took tap dance lessons here. So 4-H programs, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, all those kinds of things were kind of located, centered right here, as well as a good meeting facility, kind of like a civic center for not just Sunrise, but the whole area.
And a lot of people, a lot of immigrants came to work the mines here, obviously, and they knew that some of them really felt that it was going to be a short-term thing. But then they got here and they fell in love with this area. And a lot of them are buried up in the cemetery up in Hartville.
It's amazing.
It just, there's something about this area that draws people to it. I wonder if somebody said one time, if you build it, they will come. I have no idea.
It's interesting, and I've researched that a little bit about how the immigrants, through word of mouth or through, I can't remember what they called these guys, but they were basically agents to procure immigrant labor.
Well, almost like brokers.
Like a broker.
Yeah.
And they would bring families in. And there are some great family stories about how a guy would come, he'd send for his brother, he'd send for his father, he'd send for his wife, or something like that.
Sure.
And pretty soon you had a little enclave here of Italians, and primarily Italians and Greeks, coming through maybe through a similar process at the same time. There were many other ethnic groups here, but one of the things I like to point out when I do guide people on tours is how Sunrise was really a magical place and a real evidence of how the American melting pot can work and be successful. They came in with different languages, different cultures. They worked together. They were kind of forced together in a small canyon because there was nothing else around here. There was no infrastructure around here. When these people came here to work, there was nothing here. There were no people here, and that's why, by that very system, the mining camp was, by necessity, the business model, because they had no people to pull labor from. They had to bring in their people. When you bring in people, you have to supply them with the housing, with the water, the food, the building supplies. All the essentials had to come from the company, company town. It's an amazing business model we don't use now, and we couldn't afford it. But this was a great example of it, and I think a successful example of it.
Do you know when they started mining here? What year they started mining? I know that it came long before the YMCA was built, but
this was originally a copper mine before Colorado Fuel and Iron had it, and that occurred in the 1880s. The late 1870s was probably when they were first discovering copper. The 1880s was the boom era for the copper, which established the town of Hartville. Essentially, was a copper boom town. Of course, it had its cycles of boom bust. And then when the copper kind of played out, that's when it was promoted as an iron-rich area because they found iron under the copper. And then one guy by the name of Charles Guernsey was instrumental in promoting this area to steel companies for its iron. And he was the man that stuck with it. He stuck with it, took options on a lot of these old patented copper claims, marketed them to steel companies, and finally got a hit of a steel company in the late 1800s. That failed. There was a bank failure, the Bering Bank failure in the late 1800s. That deal failed, but Charles Guernsey kept after it. And he kept after Colorado Fuel and Iron, who eventually, because they were running out of iron in Colorado, they eventually bid on this project, even though it was 300 and some miles from their smelter. This eventually became their primary source of iron ore up until World War II. And original estimates of around 800,000 tons, they eventually mined over 43 million tons of iron ore out of here.
Oh my.
And were set to mine for 20 more years with the current reserves that they knew of. But things just didn't go well in the 70s for the steel industry at all. And so a confluence of many factors forced them to close, just shut their doors in July of 1980.
Sure. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I have to go back into my American history. Wasn't Carnegie really big into steel at that point? Rockefellers
Yes, but
were...
I'm not for sure. I don't know the relationship between
Sure.
the Carnegies and
Rockefellers,
the Rockefellers. I mean, I don't think the Rockefellers were near as big a player as the Carnegie.
right.
I don't know. I'm thinking this may have been the only real big steel play that the Rockefellers were involved with.
Sure.
I don't know. But I do know that it was very important. It was a very important strategy that John Rockefeller Jr. developed to change, the management labor equilibrium, we'll call it, or that relationship.
And so Rockefeller came in and decided to take mining to a different level, more so of a friendlier environment, a family environment. And here on the site where the mine was, there are foundations of literally hundreds of homes that were here at one time.
Yeah, I would say maximum house count would probably be right around 100. The heyday of, it would be hard to say, to identify what the real heyday is economically as to what the real heyday of the town was as far as population. But early on, early 1900s, it must have been exciting to live here because everything was done by hand labor. Everything was done by hand. The mining was done by hand. The building of the homes was done by hand. Transportation was still horse and buggy. Rail didn't arrive till 1901, 02, 03 before they actually got rail service here. Those first years of build out, I was reading a geologist's report. Thought there may be 1,200 people here in this canyon. Well, it must have been awfully exciting. But you have to think, Colorado Fuel and Iron had to bring all the material and supplies in from probably Colorado on rail to Cheyenne and then freight them up here, with mule or ox freight from Cheyenne for a couple of years.
Before the railroad got here.
Before the rail got here.
Yeah, they had to
be
take
an incredible time.
It had to be by wagon.
Yeah.
Horse and wagon. And of course, a lot of the mines at that time used mules that would go down into the mines.
They did here on the Chicago side.
Sure. And so Rockefeller builds this place in 1917, 1918, something like that. And then America is not only ensconced in war at that time, but the Spanish flu hits at that time. And so I suppose they were probably scrambling for labor at this point.
Oh, it was incredible. It was incredible. They were trying to supply the war effort by working 24/7, keeping the mine operating full time. World War I was tough. We have some great pictures of some of the parades they would have right in front of the YMCA here. They would hold a parade to send their boys off to war. A lot of the young men from this community went to war. Many of them didn't come back. We have better figures for World War II. I was looking at some figures for World War II. The things that you had mentioned are so true. I think like around 90 to 91 men from Sunrise participated in World War II. I find that number astounding, which meant, of course, CF and I had a tough time finding good help during World War II, and there's some fairly easy to document. Their work records show that they tried to have a workforce of around 500 to 600 people here at the mine, and they were going through people like crazy because they just could not find good help during World War II. It was difficult.
Yeah, they at that point, I assume that a lot of their young labor force was going off and getting drafted right away. And so you've got a lot of the old veterans and nobody to teach anything to.
It was a very difficult time.
So I wonder if there was a lot of female labor at that point.
There was, not in the mine, in the mine. Actually, the first, I know the woman whose mother was the first female miner here. We talked about that. That didn't occur until the 70s until it was required. Wow. And then CF and I had to start hiring women, and they did to a certain degree, and they had to kind of change the way the whole mining operation went.
Sure.
Of like the shower houses and those kinds of things, dressing rooms. But in fact, they did hire women to run all aspects of the mine, underground, surface. I don't know much about the rail because Colorado Fuel and Iron had subsidiary company, Colorado Wyoming Rail, was a short line rail, and they would haul the ore from here to Guernsey and that kind of a thing. I'm not for sure if many women worked on the railroad, but they did have miners, women.
Well, the railroad was still pretty prevalent back there in Guernsey at that time too. So, yeah, interesting. But so we're sitting in a building that was built by John Rockefeller Jr. Built the hospital here, built up a lot of the things in the community. You still see, traveling around Sunrise, a lot of the homes that were brick built for their foremen, for their managerial staff. You have on site here, according to Ripley's Believe It or Not, the longest garage in America. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was listed on Ripley's Believe It or Not as there's some qualifiers in there, is the longest, I think they said, how'd they word that? The longest garage under one roof, something like that is how they qualified it.
Sure.
And it's 75 or 80 stalls, built in early 1900s, built about 1924, 25, or 26. Considering cars were much narrower and smaller at that time, the stalls are pretty narrow. But it is one continuous garage.
Right.
When the town, of course, first developed in turn of the century, nobody had cars. There were no cars. The town was in a small canyon, small homes, packed tightly together on small lots, small streets, narrow streets, no place for cars. So when everybody started buying cars, no place to put them, so CF and I decided the best way to solve this problem is to build garages. So they built what I call perimeter garages. They're on the perimeter of the town site, where they could dig into the mountain and build a garage. They would build these perimeter garages. And it's such a small town site, it wasn't so difficult to come home, park the garage and walk home. Park the car at the garage and walk home. It's not too far.
And the construction of those garages is amazing. It's got foundation of cement.
Yeah.
Knowing that we didn't have cement mixers back there, all of that work had to be done by hand. Plus the idea that they had the pitched roof perfectly seated on that garage all the way through, and it absolutely was put in the perfect location because it drains off into a natural reservoir in the back. I mean, it was brilliant the way they thought of these things.
Well, I mean, CF and I had, besides mining engineers, they had a lot of civil engineers here too also. And so one of the things, one of my prized possessions that I found in the vault downstairs when we eventually got the vault open was probably unintentionally a blueprint of some of the original town, a civil engineer's blueprint of the town, how it was laid out, which to me is kind of interesting to look at because it talks about all of the infrastructure, the pipe, the wire, the sewer. Sunrise had fire suppression in the street. It's sewer in the street. They were a very modern town for their era. They had what they needed right here in the middle of nowhere.
And they had to be up to mine specifications, correct?
The mine did. Well, let's maybe put it this way. There wasn't a whole lot of regulation of the mine until the 1970s when Mining Safety and Health Administration started. There was a Bureau of Mines before, but then there was real enforcement in the 1970s. Sure. And so then the mine had to meet safety requirements. The office space had to meet safety requirements. And I'm not sure, I don't think the town site had to, but it may have had to. But anything having to do with the business of the mine had to meet strict safety criteria. Electrical, plumbing, hazard, any type of hazard, sure. Fall hazard. It was, I'm a certified miner and I have to take the MSHA training. Right. So I know a little bit about that, and I know that it changes all the time. But I do know that was a big change for the mine here when MSHA regulations did come in. Of course, it necessitated a lot more safety instruction, a lot more paperwork, right. And a lot more monitoring right. of what's going on in the mine.
I think what's interesting too is the YMCA here has its the bones in the basement with the three alley bowling alley. It has a gym upstairs. I mean, it's just an all brick building. It's just absolutely amazing. And I mean, the whole town is amazing. and you own the town. But when you got into it, and we've talked about this before, John, but what was your idea of buying a town?
I didn't stop to think too much about what I was going to do with the town, because my mind was focused more on what am I going to do with the iron here. And I thought, if I can do something with the iron, maybe I can save the town or what's left of it. My initial thought was, iron made the town, maybe iron can save the YMCA. And, I had 3 really good years of marketing my product, and I haven't focused as much on it as I should, but I'm working on some other projects. We've been working with some other companies too, and some new technologies. As time goes on, there's new technologies to, once again, upgrade the iron units that are here and maybe make a product.
Sure.
So we've got some ideas, and I'm working with some companies.
Right.
But yeah, initially I didn't lose a lot of sleep over that very thought of what am I going to do with the town. I just loved the site. I fell in love with the location immediately, and I thought, there's a way. I'll figure this out. I usually figure things out as I go along.
Well, and you have a heart for history.
Yeah.
So you look at this.
fascinating.
You look at this town, and you think to yourself,
Yeah.
where did it come from? How did it start?
Yeah.
But then you had an interesting twist. About 3 years ago, they started, I don't know how you brought them in, but you brought in one of the archaeologists who was the archaeologist from the state of Wyoming.
Yeah.
And he's had a nonprofit for years, since the 80s. How did you meet him, and how did you bring him in for this archaeological dig?
Well, it's kind of an amazing story. When I bought the place, I didn't know there was an archaeological site on this, on this whole property. I did know that everybody talked about, we're finding arrowheads, yeah, there's a lot of artifacts around. I grew up on a ranch not far from here, and it's not uncommon to find arrowheads. So I'm just thinking, they mean arrowheads. I didn't realize that that this was a paleo site. I mean, this is ancient stuff. The first peoples in this, in North America were probably here getting their ochre. I didn't know that. Soon, within 2 years after I bought the site, I was approached by George Siemens and George Frizen, who I did not know, to come in and ask me. First, they notified me that there's an archaeological site here. Did I know about it? No. Do you mind if we research it? No, that's great. I was all gung ho. I didn't know it was here. Let's look into it. So right away, they established the first summer. They established it was just an amazing site. They were finding so many artifacts. It was just amazing.
How many artifacts do you think you've got?
Thousands.
Thousands right now, right?
Thousands of artifacts.
And everything's on site here?
Everything, we store everything on site.
In the vaults?
And we have a vault here in the YMCA.
Right.
We store it all here. It's the richest Clovis site in the Western Hemisphere. So it's just an amazing thing, and the archaeologists have tried to explain to me, and it takes a long time for me to understand this, how unusual and how significant and how unique this archaeological site is, because not only is it an ochre quarry or a procurement site for the red iron oxide pigment that people have used forever. We find that in 400,000-year-old cultures. We find it in most of all human history. There's something going on with iron oxide in humans. Well, this is where they procured a lot of it, right here. Very unique. And I think the second or third summer they were here, they discovered the toolstone quarry not far from the ochre quarry. This large quarry of still a lot of reserve, what we call chert, or the toolstone that they were using to make these tools and projectiles, right here, right in front of the YMCA. How that did not get destroyed.
And in these dig sites, you have not had to dig very deep. I think they say that the deepest dig so far has been 13 feet, which is pretty amazing to find thousands of artifacts that close to a surface here.
Well, yeah, it depends on where you're digging. Now, on that steep hillside over there where the real technical Powers 2 site, that is a dig in a prior paleo mine, you don't have to go too far to get to bedrock. So your stratified layers are probably, I think that trench might have gone down about 2 meters at the deepest point. Now when they come away from that site and they get down into what was the original canyon, we have come to find out that the original canyon that is now filled in was quite deep. We had a track hoe in here 2 summers ago that went as deep as extent as it could go and never found the original, could not find bedrock, could not find the original depth. So we know that there's a tremendous amount of fill in the original canyon. And we know from, I was reading a book that Charles Guernsey wrote, and we know that it was hard to get up here on horseback at the turn of the century. And that has all changed. You know, there's a highway coming up here now. There's a town on a, but it was difficult to get up here even on horseback, 100 years ago.
So really, you couldn't do a lot of the digs at that point.
No.
The one of the things that George had said, George Siemens, was that this site is so rich and so incredible, it could be a world dig by the time it's all said and done, correct?
Yeah. I don't know. This kind of scares me.
Yeah, and the idea that it is such a rich dig, he said that this site could be dug for another 100, 200 years.
Oh, absolutely.
And not even scratch the surface as to what's been here.
You just don't know what you're going to find. I took George and Jerry to a site last night that had never been explored up on this ridge of mountains up here, and I don't even know what it is. And we spent an hour up there looking at it, and George didn't know what it was either. But we're finding the rings, the large rings up on this mesa. What were they? What is this wall we found last night? What is this going on? We don't know if it's a paleo or if it's more modern or historic. But we think this whole Hartville uplift still needs a much more concentrated investigation archaeologically. And like George said, a lot of it is private ground, which is a good thing, which means that if we can get access, maybe a lot of it is still intact and has not been scavenged.
Sure.
We'll see.
Now the stone circles are 50 feet in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
They've got crushed iron and red oxide in it, correct?
Yeah.
Which was used in a lot of perhaps old worship and rituals and things like that. So they may have been up that high. They might have been a worship site or a ritual site or burial site. You never can tell.
Don't know.
Have you been up there? Have you seen those?
I was the one that pointed him out to George and George originally. I knew about him for probably a year or two before I told him about him because the prior owner had showed them to me.
Sure.
And there's a bunch,
It takes a while to get up there, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We have what we call teepee rings at our ranch. And so I just figured, it's teepee rings. Well, no, that's not what these are. These are not teepee rings.
No.
They're not finding any...
Not 50 feet in diameter.
No, not 50 feet in diameter. And they're finding nothing in these sites that would give you an indication that they were a residence or inhabited by people as a residence. They're not finding anything along those lines. They're just finding small pieces of iron. And what were they doing up there? We don't know.
Sure.
Maybe some fire pits.
Yeah. Or like I said, it could have been a worship area up there. You never can tell. You also have come across in this archaeological dig a type of iron that has never been seen before. Tell me a little bit about that. It's now called the John Voigt chert. Oh,
the chert. Yes. It is a type of rock. It is what we call a cryptocrystalline silica. It's a thermally created. It's created in a thermal environment, hot water probably, silica in solution. And what it creates is a rock, a very competent, hard, heavy rock that behaves like glass. It has no laminar structure to it at all. It's a layman term. It's a blob of glass, colored by whatever impurities might be iron. A lot of it's red, brown, green, gray, white. We found some that's translucent. And it behaves, the thing that's so nice about chert, and the reason it becomes such a good tool stone, because when you learn this material, if you get a good piece without too many cracks in it, then it behaves like glass. And if you know how to hit it, you can control the way it breaks. It does not break on a plane or a laminar surface. It breaks depending on how you hit it. And it breaks in a concussion, the concussion of the way you hit it, the direction and the speed that you hit it, you can control the way it breaks. And it will break, and if you learn it, you can make projectile points, or you can make digging tools. You can control the break, and you can make extremely sharp edges, sharper than steel. these
And they're very not only resilient, but they're very hard, correct?
very hard, and you can resharpen them, and if you just got to know how to do it. That's what flint knapping is all about. And this chert, this John Voigt chert, unusual because we found it down here in the canyon. We don't know where it came from. Many of the projectile points and many of the tools we're finding in the site are made from this chert. And the chert is gorgeous from the standpoint of color. It can grade from clear to black to green in one rock, which is really, really unusual. And it will still have the competence to flint knap it into the projectile point or tool, whatever you want to make.
Right.
Flint knapping is a skill that takes thousands and thousands of hours to develop, to become good at it, to know what you're doing. I can't do it. Very few people can do it.
Sure. And because they've never seen anything like this, it is now recorded in the Smithsonian as the John Voigt chert.
It is now an official deposit as a John Voigt chert.
And so it's named after you because it's on your property, and you're leaving a legacy.
Yeah.
And all you wanted to do was buy a town.
Yeah, I didn't want a rock named after me.
Now I asked you this before. You get to the point, you love history, you like this. You've got archaeologists here on site working throughout the year. You've got the DNR and the wildlife people on your property doing a bat study. You've got pretty much a lot of different things on this one property.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I asked you this before, I'll ask you on camera. When did you decide this is bigger than what I thought it was going to be?
Yeah, and I had a meeting, I guess, what do you call it? Come to Jesus meeting one day. When I decided, boy, this is really important. I had really been conflicted about, man, should I have let these people in here? I'm going to lose my solitude. There's a potential that I might not be able to mine my iron. I didn't realize it was going to be this fantastic and this important and this unique. And George Frizen, and the lead geologist, George Frizen, and the field geologist, George Siemens, had said, we really think that hillside is an in-place paleo-mine. Okay, I don't know what that is. Well, then they would describe, they mined ochre there 13,000 years ago, some of the first people on this continent. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty skeptical. Surely that modern humans disrupted that in the copper era, at least. And surely CF&I ruined it. I mean, they busted all these hills down. They moved earth. They were moving earth all the time. Surely that can't be intact. Well, when they finally started excavating the Powers 2 site in earnest to get into that, and they did a professional job, as they had delineated the inferred mine and they were digging a trench across there, it became evident right away that in fact that was an in-place mine that had not been disturbed. Because they know when they're digging down, they can age stuff. I didn't know this, but you can take an artifact, you find an artifact. And if it's been in the ground long enough, it will get certain deposits on the upper and lower surface. And you can tell if it's been in that position for a long time. Everything gave indications that it had been there and had not been disturbed for thousands of years. And then they eventually found some material that they could use for carbon dating, and then they did establish that in fact, at least 13,000 year old, that stuff has been there. So then I was convinced that they did know what they were talking about. It was a substantial paleo mine. It deserves our attention, and so now I need to pay attention. And we need to make sure the world pays attention. And it's time that we make the commitment to share it with the world at this point. I mean, I'm always willing to share, but something this unusual and this important needs to be shared with the world in whatever mechanism that is. If it's a World Heritage Site or a National Historic Site or whatever,
sure,
we need to share that information because it's so unique.
Yeah. There had to have been a point where you had to say, I've got to move over.
Yeah, I have to get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
Yeah, get out of the way.
And, how hard was that for you?
It's not that hard for me. I move from project to project. I see things. I try to see things as opportunity. I mean, my opportunity here was maybe to make some money on iron. Well, that's money. Maybe something that's more important is is to look into the history of this whole site from a paleo standpoint, from a human standpoint. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that maybe some of the very first modern humans that ever came in through this country are on this continent were here. They found this ochre. They found the chert, and they were here. It's hard for me to put that into perspective.
But you realize we're walking in the footprints of men that were 13,000 years old. That's amazing.
And they were here continuously.
Yeah.
Here, coming back, thousands of years, year after year after year, for thousands of years, getting their ochre and their toolstone. To me, that's just phenomenal. I mean, I think the historic aspect that, modern humans, we white people, have been here for 100 years exploiting the iron oxide to make, our iron, we're still in the Iron Age.
Yeah.
We're still making iron things. We've only been here 100 years, and there's incredible history here for that.
Yeah.
But think about, take that times 130? 13,000 years. Think of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, John, you've got an incredible find here. You've got an incredible dig going here. And I'm sure we're going to update this as things begin to change and as things begin to grow. We get to our age and we think, how much can we do with what we've been given?
Yes.
And sometimes I lay awake at night and think, how much can I accomplish today? And
right.
when am I going to be able to have to lay it down?
Yeah.
But I wish you the best going forth on this. Where do you see it going in the next couple of years?
Well, this is exciting. This is really exciting. It's a little unnerving because we don't really know yet what direction we're going, but we got a pretty good idea. As we're forming a 501c3 to get this going, and we have board members of concerned, really great people who are interested in not only the paleo end, but the historic end of this. We want to move forward with some type of organization, some mechanism to not only preserve the paleo, preserve the historic, but I think a very important component of that is the educational outreach aspect of it.
Sure.
We need to somehow figure out how do we share it and yet keep it secure, because sometimes I've always thought those two goals are working at odds with each other. We want to share it, but we have to keep it secure. While you bring people in, are you keeping it secure? There's got to be a method we can do it.
Right.
Yeah. So we're hoping we find that, discover that way.
And I think it's pretty incredible that you have, parties and tours and even the archaeologists that are here are bringing in children to teach them. Mm-hmm. So it's really become an educational center.
I think that's what it's for.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's an incredible place. It's a magical place.
It really is. There's way too much serendipity that has happened to me in the last 9 years. So I'm just going to go with my gut on this one and say we need to just share this.
Yeah. Well, John, I sure appreciate you sitting down with us today on Homespun, and best of luck going forward, and keep us in the loop.
Okay, we'll do.
All right.
We'll do the best we can. We'll have a better idea where we're going by the end of this summer.
All right. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you.
Heart and soul, I fell in love with you, heart and soul, the way a fool would do madly, because you held me tight and stole a kiss in the night. Heart and soul, I begged to be adored, lost control, and tumbled overboard madly. That magic night we kissed right there in the moonlight. Oh, but your lips were very thrilling. Never before were mine so willing. Now I see what one embrace can do. Look at me, it's got me loving you madly. That little kiss you stole held all my heart and my soul. Took a walking past your house late last night. shades were pulled and drawn, way down tight from within the dim light cast. Two silhouettes on the shade, oh what a lovely couple though they made. Put his arms around your waist, he held you tight, kisses I could almost taste. In the night, wondered why I'm not the guy whose silhouettes on the shade I couldn't hide the tears in my eyes.
I thought about taking some anger management courses right about then, but I thought, shoot, there's just not enough time. I'm just gonna go down and knock the snot out of him.
I lost control and rang your bell. Well, I was sore, let me in or else I'll beat down your door. When two strangers who had been two silhouettes on the shade said to myself, you're on the wrong block. Rushed down to your house with wings on my feet, loved you like I'd never loved you, my sweet. Thought that you and I could be two silhouettes on the shade all of our days. Two silhouettes on the shade, heart and soul. I fell in love with you, heart and soul, the way a fool would do madly. Because you held me tight, you stole a kiss in the night, heart and soul. I begged to be adored, lost control, and tumbled overboard madly. That magic night we kissed right there in the moonlight. We kissed right there in the moonlight. Someday, when I'm awfully low, when the world is cold, I will feel a glow just thinking of you and the way you look tonight. Yes, you're lovely with your smile so warm and your cheeks so soft. There is nothing for me but to love you and the way you look tonight. Ah, the way you look tonight. With each word, your tenderness grows, tearing my fear apart. And that laugh that wrinkles your nose touches my foolish heart. Oh, lovely, never ever change. Keep that breathless charm. Won't you please arrange it? 'Cause I love you just the way you look tonight. just the way you look tonight. Fly me to the moon and let me sing among those stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, darling, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear that pitter pat? Well, the happy tune is your step. Life can be complete on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with those blues on parade, but I'm not afraid because this rover has crossed over. If I never had a cent, I'd be rich as Rockefeller.
at my feet on the sunny side of the street. I'd have gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street. Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave those worries on the doorstep. Just direct those cute little feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear that bitter bat and the happy tune that's your step? Life can be complete on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with those blues on parade, but I'm not afraid because this rover has crossed over. If I never had a cent, I'd be rich as Mr. Rockefeller. Gold dust at my feet on the sunny side